Hi friends and welcome back to my channel. My name is Katey Flowers and today we are chatting about the top 10 decks that I would like to try and use before this year is over. I'm not committing to anything because I'm a very non-committal person, but at the moment, these are the decks that I have in my mind that I would like to spend more time with. And in fact, I have just started a series called Keep or Cull, in which I'm spending some dedicated time with a particular deck for about 2 to 3 weeks, and I'm vlogging that experience. So the decks that I'm going to be showing you in this video are the decks that are sort of at the forefront of my mind to use in that series. So I'd definitely love to hear in the comments below which deck or decks you are most curious about and you would like to feature in that series. Obviously, in a perfect world, I would love to be working with all of my decks all of the time, but time is a limited resource. And essentially, I think what kind of groups all these decks together are that they are either old favorites that I haven't used a lot lately, or they're decks that are more new to me that I haven't spent much time with yet. But that's enough of a preamble. Let's get to the decks. The first is the Mesquite Tarot. This is such a cute little mini deck that I have always loved the artwork of, but I had it when it was first released and I just always sort of struggled to connect with it. I loved the look of it and like I know the meaning of tarot, so like I technically can read with it. It's just every time I pull the cards out and I do a spread, it just sort of, it didn't have that X factor, star factor vibe that we like our decks to have, or at least I like to have my decks to have. I like to feel like I have a connection with them and that they sort of like sing, they talk to me, and I just never had that with this deck. And it always made me so sad because this is some of the most beautiful artwork and I just love the way that each of the cards are depicted, and I especially love the renaming of the court cards here. I think it's really clever, really simple, and really pretty. It also comes with a great little book, which I think is fabulous, and I'd love to explore it more through working with the cards and going to the guidebook and just getting a better sense of this deck and its purpose, and hopefully coaxing out a bit of a personality that I'm sure this deck has, I just haven't found yet. Next up is the Sakki Tarot. This deck is so weird and so fun. It's a deck that I got and I did actually do a handful of readings with last year, was it? Or maybe even the year before. And I had a really, really good time with it. This deck is just kind of outrageous and wacky. There's a bunch of like headless people in this. It's just really weird and I kind of love it. It's quite busy, a lot's going on, which is not something I always love in my decks, but for some reason I think it works here. It's chaotic, it's playful, it's weird, it's silly. I don't know, I'm just kind of into it. So this deck, unlike the Mesquite Tarot, is not lacking in personality. I just haven't spent enough time with it yet. Now, another deck that I have spent quite a bit of time with, but not so much that I feel like I feel really comfortable with it, I know it well, and that like it's one of my favorites, is the Spacious Tarot by Carrie Mallon. In theory, this is one of my favorites because it's some of my favorite artwork and some of my favorite card depictions. I have really enjoyed the readings that I have done with this deck. I just haven't done a whole lot of them yet. I find the colors in this deck and the artwork in this deck to be really soothing and inviting, and it's definitely a world that I want to spend some more time in. I love that there are no humans in these cards, so it sort of allows space for us to insert ourselves into the image, or to insert our own ideas and interpretations. I feel like this deck has done a great job of giving us enough, but not too much. It's not too prescriptive. And as you'd expect with a tarot superstar like Carrie Mallon, the little white book is fabulous. I don't know, when I think of this deck, I just think of like potential and opportunity, and I feel like I haven't made the most of those things with this deck yet. Then I think what is the last deck that I backed on Kickstarter? It's the My Garden deck. I was enamored of this deck when I first discovered it on Instagram a couple of years ago now. And when it finally arrived, I was sort of just not using tarot a whole lot. But what originally attracted me to these cards is still there. It's the colors and it's the artwork and it's like the simplicity, but it feels quite original too in its own way, even if it is quite obviously very Rider-Waite-Smith based. I love the people, I love the characters depicted in these cards. I just find it really charming, really sweet, and I'm really pulled to this deck. I guess it just arrived at a time when I wasn't really focusing on tarot, I wasn't doing a lot of readings, so inevitably it wound up sitting on my shelf and not getting nearly as much use as it should. Next we have what is almost a classic at this point, the Fountain Tarot. Everyone was talking about the Fountain Tarot, what, like 4 or 5 years ago? It was like the deck for a year, I swear. And I loved it too. These are some of my favorite backings of any cards that I own. And the colors and the artwork in this is just, it's incredible. Like this deck is a work of art. Or rather, it's a collection. It's a whole portfolio. It's 78, 79 pieces of incredible art. It's just absolutely stunning. I love the color palette in this. To me, this just feels so neutral and calming. It's very light and airy, and I have had so many good readings with this deck. It was one of my most used deck a few years ago, and it still has such a soft place in my heart. I love this deck. I just haven't reached for it so much in the last couple of years, and I want to spend some more time with it. This is another one where the guidebook is incredible. Like, it is a little white book. There's not a lot of info, but it's been so thoughtfully put together, and what's included is just, it's really, really well done. Now, a deck that everybody fell in love with was the This Might Hurt Tarot. I have it, I just haven't really used it all that much. This gilding is just out of this world. This holographic, it's like purpley green. Oh, so cool. This is one of my favorite of the sort of like updated Rider-Waite-Smith clones. It's not a clone, but it feels so Rider-Waite-Smith still. Like so many of the images, they just look like they're redrawn, restylized, but they feel contemporary. Other decks sort of like try and go off in a completely different direction, reinterpret the cards, or, you know, do something different with tarot. But there's like this sort of subgenre of decks, I feel like, that, you know, take the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery and maybe change up a few things here and there, but they still feel essentially, and even look to a large extent, like the Rider-Waite-Smith. They just feel updated. They feel contemporary. And there's a few decks that have tried to do that. Many of them have done it well, but I think this would be my favorite of those decks. So this is another one of those decks that arrived more towards the end of when I was slowing down with using tarot. So I just haven't used it a whole lot, but it's beautiful and I want to. Then the only Oracle deck on this list is the Amethyst Oracle by Jessica Bott. I do have the sort of sister tarot deck to this, which is the Idiosyncratic Tarot, but I already love that. And I could also add this to this list, but I'm like I said, every single deck I own would be on this list if I didn't try to cap it. And I already love the Idiosyncratic Tarot. I've used that quite a lot and I've really enjoyed my time with it. The Oracle deck though, I feel like I haven't clicked with in the same way. I definitely don't feel drawn to in the same way. It's weird because like you put them side by side and they look like they belong together. The artwork is very similar. The backings are almost the same, just different colors. Like they look like they're meant to work together, be together. And yet I love the tarot deck. And I just don't feel very strongly about the Oracle deck. So I've been saying for a long time that I want to spend more time with this Oracle deck and try to sort of like get into it a bit more, but it just hasn't happened yet. So it is something that's on my mind to spend some more time with. Because in theory, everything I like about the Idiosyncratic Tarot is here in this Oracle deck. It's just an Oracle instead of a tarot. So it's kind of weird that I haven't fallen in love with this in the same way. Next is a deck that sort of sits in between those two categories I spoke about. It's the Star Spinner Tarot. This is definitely newer to me than like the Fountain Tarot, for example, but I don't feel like I've used it as much as I want to. This deck is so stunning. I think it's one of the most beautiful decks I've ever seen, and it's one of the most beautifully produced mass market decks that I've seen that isn't like super, super expensive. I just think it's wonderful. We know I'm very drawn to certain colors and certain color palettes. This deck definitely fits into that. The colors are one of the things that I like most about this deck, but also just the artwork is so pretty. And I do feel like the takes on the cards, the decisions that were made in terms of the art and the depictions is really quite unique and interesting. It's just such a pretty deck, and I have done a number of readings with it, although that was like over a year ago now. When I was working with it, I was having so much fun. I think I even posted on Instagram at one point that I felt like I was falling back in love with tarot with this deck, and then I just sort of stopped. So I want to recapture that feeling and get back into it. And then the Japaridze Tarot, I'm not really confident in how I'm pronouncing that, but it's the best I've got for now, is another deck that I got really quite recently. I picked it up at the bookshop that I work at when it came back in print. This is another one actually that the mass market production is top notch. These cards are just so beautiful and the art is delightful. And it's another one that feels really fresh and unique. When I first discovered this deck online, I did feel like it was a bit, I don't know, too different for me at the time and where I was at. But as I grew as a tarot reader and my interests, I suppose, expanded and changed, I saw the appeal of this deck a lot more. So when it came back in print, I was really excited. It's so beautiful, and I just feel like it's really quite different to any deck that I've read with and worked with before. And that's a really exciting thing. And then number 10 is the deck that I probably have spent the most time with. It might be one of my most used decks of all time, to be honest. It's the Sasuraibito. I can never not want to work with this deck, and I can never not smile when talking about this deck. So basically I want to spend some time with this deck just because it makes me so damn happy. And the readings that I've had with this deck over the years have just always been so fizzy and alive and vibrant and meaningful, poignant, all of the things you want a tarot reading to be. This deck gives me. The guidebook that comes with this deck is fabulous too. It's personal, it's intimate, it's beautiful, but it's also quite direct. This is just one of my favorite decks of all time. It's one of the decks that I've had the most joy using. And because I haven't used tarot so much, I obviously haven't used this deck very much in the last year or so. And thinking about using tarot and thinking about using this deck in particular just makes me so happy. So I just know I need to spend some dedicated time with this deck and rekindle our love affair. So those are the 10 decks that are sort of at the top of my list that I want to spend more time with. The other one I suppose I should probably mention is that at some point I would like to get to unboxing the Children of Litha. That's only been on my shelf for 18 months. So like I said, let me know if you would like any of these decks in particular to show up in my next or in future Keep or Cull videos. If you're curious to see me work with them and explore the imagery with you, definitely let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and an extra big thank you goes to my patrons over on Patreon for all of your support. And an especially big thank you goes to my high tier Patreons, Lynette Brown, Livia, and Laurie. Thank you so much for supporting me and my content. I really appreciate it. But I think that's enough from me for now, so thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you in the comments and in the next video, and until then, so much love. Bye!